everybody. I am Joe Marcello, joined as always by my partners in comic book crime, Warren Phillips.
Hey, everyone.
And Mike Farah.
Howdy, howdy.
We are the Dollar Bin Bandits, and you're listening to the Dollar Bin Bandits podcast. And this is the last episode of the Dollar Bin Bandits for the year 2021. And more importantly, it is the last episode of our season of Superman. And that being said, we are proud to bring to you our interview with Jon Bogdanove. Okay, now he is another of the artists, writers of the team that I became familiar with through the death of Superman. He had a really unique style, a style honestly, at first I wasn't too much of a fan of, but it evolved and it changed, and I grew to really enjoy his work. Specifically because he introduced the character Steel, which went on to become a huge character in the DC universe.
Yeah, I think it's also, you'll hear now that he was living on a boat in the Hudson River and commuting, going to work at Marvel, working on Power Pack. And just an incredible story. When I first got in touch with him, he said he was out to sea and he didn't really have good reception, but we come back and I was like, this must be the most interesting man in the world. This is awesome.
Yeah, he's quite the character, and I loved hearing about his particular origin story. Living out in a boat basin up on the Upper West Side, and then sort of just kind of randomly throwing out a fishing line, so to speak, to Walt Simonson, and then becoming part of almost that family with the Simonsons, and coming into Marvel, and then coming into his own in DC on Man of Steel for 8 years. I mean, that's just an amazing run. And yeah, his art style was very unique, kind of intense and stretchy, but also muscly. It was just very, very cool style that I don't think anybody else can imitate. So as Joe said, last episode of the year, last episode of Season of Superman. Let's get to it.
So Jon, thank you so much for joining us. As we said, we're huge fans, and we really appreciate you taking the time out of your day to join us. I'll ask you the same question we ask all of our guests: is how did you get started in comics?
Oh, okay. Well, we'll get right to it. Okay. I'm not sure where to start this one. I got into comics at a kind of really fortunate time. I'm just old enough really to have skun in during the Marvel age of comics, when Marvel Comics was still Marvel. In 1985, Judy and I were still living on her boat in the 79th Street boat basin in New York City. Judy was a New York City public school teacher at PS 166 in Upper West Side, Manhattan. Not far from Mike Kaluta's old apartment, actually. We had, the year before, she had taken a sabbatical. And we had sort of, we bought an old hippie van, and we threw some bedding in the back and put some curtains up, and we went hippieing around the country in a glorious kind of boomer fashion. And along the way, we were drawing and painting and doing art and stuff. And along the way, we'd stop at comic book shops, and we picked up issue number 1 of Power Pack, and I had been following Thor, and we picked up the latest Thor, and we'd snuggle in the afterglow and read comics together. It was our sort of nightly camping routine. So we were big fans of the Simonsons beforehand, because Power Pack and Thor were our favorite comics of everything being published at that point in the 80s, followed probably by the X-Men, and I always collect Superman. So anyway, but in 1985, Judy was pregnant with Kal-El, and we were back on the boat. And I realized that I was going to have to. I had been making a really marginal living as a caricaturist and portrait artist at weddings and trade shows and bar mitzvahs and stuff like that. I'd always wanted to do comics. I didn't really have the knowledge or education for anything else. In fact, I didn't really know how to get into comics either, but I figured that was going to be my best shot at being able to support a family. So I started to try to put together a real portfolio. But in those days, it wasn't, you couldn't just go on the internet and Google up all the particulars, basic knowledge like what kind of paper do you use and what kind of materials do you use, even really basic stuff like that was sort of treasure bits of knowledge that you would glean in fandom. So I was putting together a portfolio, and I was sort of working on a story where Superman tackles a situation like Mount St. Helens. When I was growing up in the Silver Age, Superman would solve volcanoes by just stretching his cape over the top of this volcano, and it'd be like throwing a dish rag over the 5th grade science fair project. Mount St. Helens was so spectacular. That footage of the side of the mountain just caving in and running down into the valley was so transporting. And I'd read some National Geographic articles about what was happening around, and it was evident that it really is a job for Superman, and it's way, way, way bigger than it had ever been depicted in comics. Trying to evacuate the area, trying to control the devastation, trying to get people out of the way of this high-speed pyroclastic flow without moving so fast that you break their necks. All of the real life problems, all that Superman would have to realistically solve. I know it's a very geeky thing to have done, but that I was working on this story. But I was sitting on the boat one day bemoaning the fact that I didn't know what to do with this. I didn't know what to do for samples. I didn't know how to go about getting seen by an editor or anything. And while I was moping about this, Judy was saying, well, why don't you just ask, Walter and Louise Simonson? They seem like such nice people in the comics. Because for your listeners who don't know, Margaret and Jim Power of the Power Pack's parents, were obvious glyphs for Walter and Louise Simonson, and their apartment on the west side of New York was obviously Walter and Louise's apartment. And part of the reason that we loved that book so much is it felt like, well, Power Pack just lives a few blocks from us. They're somewhere in the 70s, obviously, like 71st Street, which is just 8 blocks from where we live. And it's like we're neighbors to them. And New York was a cool place to live back in those days anyway. You could be a starving artist and a public school teacher and live in Manhattan in those days. And it really felt like Spider-Man's New York, water towers and rooftops and things like that. And you could go anywhere. If I wanted to research the Morlocks, I would actually go down underneath the pen yards and hang out with homeless people and ask them if I could take pictures and stuff like that. If I to this day, I use my Daily Planet reference. When I was a fan, I just talked my way into the Daily News, told them I wanted to draw Superman and could I hang out all day and take pictures and sketch for the day. So I have these old photographs and sketches of the Daily News circa 1980 that I still use today. I update the hardware from time to time, but if I'm drawing the Daily Planet, it's still basically that city room.
That's really cool.
So Judy was like, well, just ask Walter and Wheezy. They seem like nice people. I'm sure they'd help you out. And I was like, I can't. These are comic book legends. You can't just call up famous people and ask them how to hone in on their business. Besides, their number's probably unlisted anyway. They're not going to talk to me. Blah 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 blah. Meanwhile, Judy's flipping through the New York City phone book. She finds their number. She dials the phone. She hands it to me. And I find myself cold calling comic book legend Walter Simonson, and this sort of booming Asgardian voice picks up on the other end of the line, and I'm like, Hello, Mr. Simonson. You don't know me, but can you help me become a comic book artist? Fortunately, Walter was great. Walter, if you've ever spoken to him, is a man who likes talking to a man who likes to talk. And he was so kind and so forbearing and so generous with information. He basically told me everything I needed to know. He gave me like a semester's worth of course information in about 45 minutes. And so I followed his instructions precisely. I made 2 packets of full-size, tabloid-size Xeroxes of my pencils, 1 packet for Marvel, 1 packet for DC, 6 pages each. Each packet had 3 pages of a Marvel character, 3 pages of a DC character in a variety of situations. So it wasn't just action superhero stuff. It had civilian things and real life things and people acting and conversing. So I made these 2 packets, 1 for DC and 1 for Marvel. And my DC franchise I went for was Superman, obviously. Superman was had always been my totem. And for Marvel, I thought, I thought the most fun thing for me to draw there, and the thing I'd probably be best at, would be Conan the Barbarian. Never stopping to think who I'd have to depose in order to get to draw. That's another story, though. Never even thought.
Aim high.
Yeah, aim high. Sure, I could draw Conan, but I did some great Conan samples, and I did just like Walter said. And in those days, you could do like Walter said. You could call up an editor at Marvel or DC and make an appointment and go in and see them. So I did that. I had actually a bit of a contact at DC because one of the editors there was teaching at SVA the 2 years that I was able to go to School of Visual Arts. And so I met him. We were at a fundraiser together, and he was doing caricatures, and he wanted to get up and go to the bathroom. And I said, well, I'll do the caricatures for you while you're gone. And I was doing these great caricatures because that was my mode of living in those days. So he'd invited me to come and show him his stuff at DC. It was a very strange encounter, because when I told him I wanted to draw comics, he went, "Comics? And it did kind of leave me thinking, like, dude, you're working for DC. How can you feel that way? It just seemed, but anyway, he was nice enough to give me his number, and I made an appointment with him. And on the appointed morning, I put on my blue Clark Kent suit and my red Clark Kent tie and my fedora, and marched down to Rockefeller Center and sat next to the fiberglass statue of Clark, reading the Daily Planet, and waited for my appointment. And the hours ticked by, and appointment time came and went, and I started to be nervous because I had an afternoon appointment down at Marvel with Larry Hama. Finally, the receptionist was very nice, and she went in to check on this guy again. And the message came back that he just couldn't come. Who knows what was going on in the office that day, but he wasn't going to be able to see me that day. So I left my packet with the receptionist to give to the editor, and I skipped town and ran across town, Clark Kent cape tie flying behind me, ran down to Marvel. And I walked in at Marvel, and it was still the Marvel age of comics. It was just like Stan had promised in the soapbox and the bullpen bulletins. It still felt like the House of Ideas. Jack Abel was holding court in the bullpen, cracking jokes, and Mary Severin was there, and the bullpen was an actual bullpen, and around it, all the editors' offices were arrayed with all the doors open, and everyone was dressed like hippies, and they were running back and forth excitedly and grooving on the artwork that they were showing each other, and it was that awesome, cool atmosphere that, as a fan reading Stan's hyperbole, you wanted it to be. It was, and it felt different from DC, which at the time felt very, very corporate, and they were trying to look like an advertising agency. So it was kind of Mad Men over at DC, and especially the Mad department. But Marvel was this freaky place of what seemed like fun. So Larry came out and got me, and he ushered me back to his office in the back corner of the bullpen, and he was flipping through my samples, and I was waiting for the bad news or whatever, and he said, "Well, kid, I got good news and I got bad news. Bad news is we're not going to fire Jon Buscema for you.
No.
But the good news is you're not leaving here without work." So he grabbed me by the ear and he dragged me down the hall, and he kicked in Carl Potts's door, and he threw me into Carl Potts's office. And he said, "Carl, give this kid work." And off he went. And Carl was in there talking to this angelic, sunny, blonde woman who I pieced together from their conversation must be Louise Simonson. And I thought, wow, here's a bookcase thing, because I started this journey with advice from Walter Simonson, and now I'm coming in on a conversation between Louise Simonson and her editor, Carl Potts. And they were talking about Power Pack. And I overheard that, oh my God, June was getting ready to leave the book. And I couldn't believe it, because as a fan, I didn't want June to leave the book. That's my favorite book. Don't let June leave that book. But while they're talking and I'm paying attention to their conversation, Carl is quietly flipping through my packet of Xeroxes. And Wheezy is saying, "But who are we going to get to replace June? Nobody in this business can draw kids. They all look like muscular dwarves." And that's when the angels took a hand, because the year previous, when we were hippieing around the country in our hippie van, I had done a drawing of kids playing on a beach in Cape Elizabeth, Maine. And I had sold that drawing at a gallery for actual money. But somehow, and I have no idea how, because it shouldn't have even come home with us, one of the sketches for that drawing found its way into my Marvel packet. So out from between the pages slipped this original sketch of kids playing on the beach, that sort of leafed its way down to the table, to the desk. And Carl didn't notice it at first, but Wheezy said, "Oh, Carl, look, he can draw kids." And that was it. I had a job. This is about a month before Kal-El was born. It was going to be 2 months until June was ready to be off the book. So Carl gave me a couple of months' work to keep me busy, keep me from getting lost over to the competition or whatever. He gave me an issue of Alpha Flight, which was going to be inked by Jerry Teleak, which was awesome. And he gave me an issue of Solomon Kane, which was going to be inked by Al Williamson. Awesome. And he gave me a pile of reference, because the thing about Carl Potts is, Carl is I think he actually teaches now, but he's a supremely good teacher. He's a supremely good editor for raw new talent, because he really can sort of show you the quickest path between being a talented amateur and being a real pro. And he gave me, a bunch of communist Chinese comics, which taught me all about negative space and proper establishing shots and all that sort of stuff. And he sent me off with work to do. And I finished my very first job while Judy was on the delivery table. And, I'm like, breathe, honey, breathe, hand me the eraser, will you? I think, okay, breathe, honey, breathe. So I literally finished the last page of Alpha Flight as Kal-El was crowning. So my career was off and running, and that's how I got into comics.
Okay, so by far that is probably one of the coolest how I got started stories anyone has told us, because I mean, how do you really beat that other than,
And most
Where
detailed.
where can you go from that, really?
you really can. So
it's so funny because it's such a strange situation, because you said you were a fan of Power Pack,
Oh yeah.
as a reader and stuff. What did you put pressure on yourself jumping in that book, knowing you were replacing June, and okay, fans are going to expect a certain kind of art or a certain look? Did you feel you had to emulate her style, or did you feel I could do sort of my own thing?
Well, we take that in pieces. Yes, I felt enormous pressure. I was scared, actually. I thought I would spend a few months drawing backups. A lot of people started in comics drawing backup stories and stuff like that. And I thought I'd get 8 pages of Potato Salad Man or something like that. And here I was, getting a regular monthly assignment right off the bat. So that was pretty intimidating. And then the other thing was Walter and Louise were so nice to us. She sort of browbeat Carl into giving me a raise because I was about to have a child. So I started out like $5 above the basic starting page rate. I started at $75 a page, which was awesome given our circumstances. And she invited me to her house for dinner. So, within a very short time, we were at, the great table of Walter and Louise Simonson. They were pretty much like Tom Bombadil and Goldberry of comics. Having lentil soup in the company of legends. So yes, I felt great pressure not to disappoint them, because they very quickly sort of became our mentors and friends, and I've been fortunate ever since to sort of be part of that cult of the Simonsons that so many of us in the business are.
What's the biggest takeaway you got, let's say, in your first year doing comics as an artist?
The biggest takeaway from my first year? Well, I mean, I went into it working very hard to make deadlines, because I knew going in that deadlines were always going to be a thing, and I know that young artists have a reputation for blowing deadlines, and I was determined not to. But my biggest takeaway is that it's very hard not to blow an occasional deadline, because it's a very demanding job. For me anyway, it was 14 to 18 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was a 2 to 3 page a week man with working those hours. So it's a fairly grueling pace, and a bit of an endurance marathon, the whole career. But it was also sort of everything it was cracked up to be in terms of fun. Even when you get past sort of the geek glory of, oh my God, I'm working at Marvel Comics. Oh, I'm drawing Spider-Man. Holy crap, I'm drawing Spider-Man. When when you get over that nerdgasm, you realize that you're now in the company of people you've admired your whole life. You're now a peer in this sort of special club. There aren't a lot of people who get to draw comics. There are an awful lot of people that want to draw comics, but the people who actually get to do it are pretty lucky.
Mhm.
I mean, Stan dubbed me. He gave me my Marvel Comics nickname in a soapbox column. I think my first or second month. So, I got that feeling of being part of the Marvel Age of Comics. I'm jocular, Jon Bogdanove.
Nice.
Thank you, Stan. Thanks, Stan.
That's a big deal.
But so the reality, the takeaway is that for the best stuff and the worst stuff, the reality met the expectation.
Okay.
In other words, yeah, it's really hard,
Mhm.
but I knew it was going to be hard. But yeah, it's everything Stan promised. At least it was for me. It was everything Stan promised.
Gotcha. And you also got to work a little later on, but with Chris Claremont on the X-Men Fantastic Four, which is, I mean, it had to be a joy to draw two of the biggest teams
Oh yeah.
in comic book history. How was that series pitched to you?
I could be remembering this wrong, but at the time, Walter and Louise and the Claremonts, they were like family. They were such close friends. And this project came up, and I don't know if Chris asked Wheezy, but Wheezy suggested that I go draw this. And I said, well, how am I going to do that in Power Pack 2? And she said, and Carl said, don't worry, we'll, I've got you a few months ahead, and then we'll have a fill in and it'll be all right. Don't worry about it. So I got the job. I heard about the job through Wheezy. And then I met Mike Carlin over the phone. He was editing Fantastic Four at the time. And it was, I mean, I would not have taken the break from Power Pack had Wheezy not insisted. But the chance to work with Chris Claremont, who, I mean, my brothers and I had been, back when Wheezy was the editor and John Byrne was drawing it, we had been such X-Men nerds for about 2 years in the late 70s, such X-Men nerds. And, but Fantastic Four had always been my favorite Marvel property growing up, just hands down. Jack stuff, post Jack 2, but mostly Jack stuff, which I discovered as a kid back when he was still doing it. It was just my favorite. The idea of a family adventure comedy in superhero terms, which is what Fantastic Four really is, was just too appealing. It ticked all the boxes for me. It had superhero action, it had monsters, it had Kirby characters, bizarre looking Kirby characters, it had a lot of human emotion and human comedy and human sentiment and touching stuff to draw. It had family dynamics to work with, so it was all my strong points. So yeah, that was I mean, I still think of it as one of the high points of my career, just in terms of the opportunity to work with Terry Austin, the opportunity to, I mean, I was working with the X-Men team, right. The same team that my brothers and I geeked out about a few years before. So, and I got to draw Ben Grimm. I was doing I got to draw Dr. Doom. If you look back through that miniseries and you see my establishing shot for Dr. Doom, you can just see I'm in full blown nerd heaven drawing that. I'm drawing Dr. Doom the Marvel way.
Yeah.
but yeah, that was a pretty awesome.
Well, as a fan, do you ever sit back and think to yourself, man, I am now part of both Fantastic Four and X-Men history?
I thought about it at the time.
There you go.
I mean, I thought about it at the time, particularly when you're young and haven't had any opportunity to get jaded or not. Not that I'm terribly jaded now, but you know, you do kind of think, oh my God, I'm, you know, like the first time I do Spider-Man. Oh my God, I'm drawing Spider-Man for money, for real. So that, I mean, that still happens to me now, you know, particularly if I'm drawing a character I haven't drawn. Like a couple of years ago, I got to draw Aquaman for the first time, and it was like, great, I'm drawing Aquaman. It's so awesome.
You know, I have to tell you, you're probably one of the first people that we've spoken to over the past, you know, what is it, like 11 months or so now, who has ever actually really reacted that way. Everyone says, well, this is my job and I was assigned it and this, I do it and I move on. Or some people are like, yeah, whatever, you know, it is what it is. I'm like, dude, come on. You're the first person who's kind of like fanboying out about saying, this is amazing. Look what I'm working on.
I'm willing to bet that pretty much everybody you've interviewed
so they're just full of crap.
Just as geeky. I'm sure they were just as geeky.
They're just too cool for the room.
Well, look, comics can be a very tough business.
Oh yeah, no,
a lot of hours.
Sure.
It's a lot of hours for not a lot of money. You know, it breaks down to, if you're lucky, a minimum wage job. And it's grueling. And then when you're no longer the hot ticket, or they just change editors, you know, you're just out. You're forgotten. So it's you know, it's a tough business. It's like show business in that way, but for a lot less remuneration.
Yeah.
So you know, that's why you go down Artist Alley and you see a lot of kind of sad or bitter or too cool for school guys, because you know, it can be hard to maintain your boyish glee in the midst of the realities of the business.
Yeah.
I'm just more child than man, probably. I don't know. I just I tend to see the good more than the bad.
Appreciate you hearing your point of view on that, though. I really, it's nice. It's refreshing to hear that, and I appreciate your, you know, the honest answer too. Sorry, Mike.
I wanted to jump back a little bit, back to your, you know, halcyon days of living in a boat and, you know, just dreaming of breaking into the comic book industry. So you eventually, I know you prepared these packets for the big two, and you eventually landed at Marvel. Were you happy to go to Marvel versus DC, or were you just happy to land at either one? Because it's interesting looking back at your career, you know, you became so identified with DC and Superman later on that it's interesting that you broke in through Marvel.
Well, I thought that I would probably start at DC. I thought I'd probably be a DC man my whole life, actually, mainly because I was and still am fanatical about Superman. So I mean, I'd been, you know, I began my career at 4 years old, jumping off the neighbor's carport with a towel tied around my neck, you know.
Guilty.
And yeah. So you can get it. I'm glad I'm good company then. And you know, I for the first 2 years of elementary school, I had that towel tucked down into my pants, tied around my neck and tucked in my pants underneath my shirt, you know, because I had the whole thing, cartoon S pinned, you know, I drew a cartoon S and pinned it to my clothes underneath my shirt. And I was very warm in first and second grade.
Why does John sweat so much?
Yeah,
I don't know.
What is that? What does that fat little kid sweat so much?
At least you weren't tripping on the cape. It was tucked
Yeah.
in.
No,
very practical.
But I had an ass like. Yeah, I forget what the heck I'm talking about.
You're talking about Superman and
Oh,
but
right.
then
Okay,
ending up
Superman.
at Marvel.
Yeah. So I didn't care where I ended up when I wanted to get in. I was desperate to start making enough money to pay for a child, basically, and maybe to someday, be able to move off the boat and into a house. Um, so I would have, and like I said, I expected to be drawing 8 pages of Potato Salad Man, and to sort of work my way in the way that most people do. Um, so I felt enormously lucky to get a job straight out, and I and I was overjoyed and surprised, frankly, that Marvel was still so Marvel-esque when I got in, and that the spirit there was so nice. Shooter hadn't started to have any of his problems. The atmosphere there was still very sort of jovial and communal and convivial. And like you see some of the old pictures from the Marvel bullpen from those days with Wheezy and Ralph Macchio and Larry Hama and Carl Potts and everybody all hanging out together and like doing human pyramids in the lobby and stuff like that. That kind of groovy hippie vibe was actually in place. It was still going on in 1985. So that was a great joy, and I was happy to be anywhere. And I think I was glad actually to go to Marvel, because I I was a little intimidated about Superman. Superman meant so much to me. Uh, I I really felt like I needed to sort of train up and be at the peak of my powers when I went over to that character, if I ever got the chance. Um, but and Marvel felt like a fun place. It felt like a family there, and DC felt like, what was the Madman agency? Um, the advertising
On the tip
agency
of
of
my
Mad
tongue.
Men felt like that.
Mhm.
Or well, okay, we can make it simpler. McMahon and Tate. It felt like McMahon and Tate there.
Mhm.
Um, so I think probably I had more fun working for Marvel. It was a great place to learn. Carl Potts was a great teacher. Louise Simonson was a great teacher. Walter was a great teacher. So where I landed, I was extraordinarily lucky.
And at Marvel during that time, you seem to, I don't know if it's gravitate towards or just sort of, in terms of the assignments you were given, other than Power Pack, you were on mutants a whole lot, right? You said you had the Fantastic Four and X-Men crossover, the issue of Alpha Flight, Exterminators with Louise Simonson again. I know you said you and maybe your brother had affinity for the X-Men group. Was that intentional, or it was just kind of a lucky draw in
No,
terms of this?
it wasn't intentional at all. Actually, it turns out that Marvel was sort of split into two camps at that point, in that there were the mutant characters, the mutant books, and the non-mutant books. And the mutant books had become very hot in the 70s when Chris and John were doing them. And so and they were really Marvel's cash cow at the time. So there were the X books, which were sort of a realm unto themselves, and then there were the core superhero books, and I just happened to fall in with Team X rather than, had I fallen in with had I gotten my first appointment with Mike Carlin and Mark Goodwald, it might have been different. I might have ended up drawing, Fantastic Four and the Avengers and Thor and all that sort of stuff. But it just happened that I fell into the mutant group and was just fine, And yes, my brothers and I were huge fans of the X books during that halcyon period when John Byrne was drawing it. But I the core Marvel characters, the core Avengers were my first love, and and you can sort of see, particularly my X Factor work and my Fantastic Four versus the X-Men work, that I was sort of pushing the X books to look and feel a little bit more like mainstream Marvel characters. I was drawing on John Byrne's influence. I was drawing on Jack's influence a lot stronger, and trying to sort of almost consciously trying to unite the two worlds, which at that point seemed sort of like they had separated into different camps, and just trying to unify and reinforce a sort of Marvel style.
Makes sense.
So at what point, or at what point did you make your transition to DC?
Well, it started immediately when Mike left Fantastic Four to go be John's editor on Superman, Man of Steel.
Okay.
He invited me to come with him right then. He took a liking to me. I took a liking to him. He really liked Kal-El. To this day, even though Kal-El's probably taller than he is, he calls him my little Kal-El. He does sort of a little
Little Brando.
my little Brando there. He says, "Oh, my little Kal-El." So I was already friendly with Mike, and he knew how I felt about Superman, so he wanted to bring me along with him when he went. And I was scared. I didn't think I was ready yet, and also I couldn't think about leaving Wheezy. She had been so good to me, and Power Pack was such a wonderful book, and I was getting to start, and she was starting to let me, when she went off to do X Factor, she let me write Power Pack, so I was getting to write, which was really awesome. And so I kept telling him no, and he'd call every few months and ask me if I was ready yet. And then I got off Power Pack, and I was drawing X Factor, and all of a sudden, big boxes started arriving at the house addressed Kal-El, boxes full of DC swag. And Kal-El would get, action figures and toys and shirts like this. And then he'd sort of sidle into me, stand by me while I was drawing away at the desk, put his elbow on my shoulder, and he'd say, Pop, he's 7 years old, Pop, you really ought to go work for Mike Carlin over at DC Comics. Just
Wow.
a subtle hint, just a little strong arm there from my son to go work for Mike. And the clincher really came when Mike called one more time. He said, look, we're thinking of making Superman effectively a weekly book by adding another title. If you come over and if you can convince Wheezy, because I was saying, I don't want to leave Wheezy, blah, 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 blah. He said, if you can come over and get Wheezy to come with you, we'll give you guys issue number 1 of the new title. And I said, okay. And I don't think I had to actually speak to Wheezy about it, because Mike talked to her. And then we talked about it together. And I realized that she had some good ideas, for Lois and Clark's relationship. One of the nice things that Mike did is he sent us giant boxes of every Superman comic since Man of Steel, since John Byrne's first one. So we had the entire run of everything, everything had done. And, Roger was already working on the books, and Roger and the Simonsons are close friends. And I became this huge Jerry Ordway fan. And so we started brainstorming. Like Wheezy is wonderful about playing with the people she likes to play with. So we started brainstorming about what we might do, and so we we agreed to go, and we were invited over to the next Superman summit, and we jumped right in, and were welcomed very kindly, and found ourselves working with probably the most devoted bunch of Superman fans ever. The thing that struck me about that book was that everybody there really cared about this character. Superman meant something personal to everybody on those books. And this was the age of the Punisher and Image and grim and gritty and all that sort of stuff. And even though Byrne had done great work, and Dan Jurgens and Jerry Ordway and Roger Stern and Jackson and everybody were doing phenomenal Superman books, books that from my perspective had completely revived the franchise, in a way that for me they were the best books in comics in those days. The sales had improved, but they had crept up. But it's as though they were swimming against the tide. But I found myself working with people who felt as strongly about Superman as I did, and they were pretty much all of them people that I idolized, or at least respected, or was in awe of. So it was a perfect storm sort of situation.
And then that you're referring to the death of Superman Summit, or is that one
that
prior?
was, I think, our second summit was
Okay.
was the Superman summit. Yeah, or second or third. The first summit we went to, I think, was down in Florida on the set of the Superboy show, where we had our first story meeting. So it was in the middle of winter. I was in sunny Florida. I was on a brand new title of my favorite character. I had a couple of months between starting at DC and the end of Fantastic Four, during which I'd done a gigantic, 4 foot tall painting of 4 foot wide, 6 foot tall painting of Superman,
Cool.
which ended up being the cover to issue #1. I actually brought the full size physical painting into the office to give to Mike. I sort of did this by accident, Mike. He said, "Don't worry, we'll use it." So I think so. The first summit was down in Florida. We actually got to be extras on it. There's some episode of Superboy where you can see Dan and me doing a sort of a Hal Roach comedy bit in the background as we're wall painters painting the walls of the inside of Daily Planet or something like this, and we started getting on a fight, and we start painting each other, and it's probably most of it never ended up on screen. But I think there's some episode that you might just get a glimpse of Baby John and Baby Dan slapping each other with paint in the background, which was generally our role at the super summits from then on. But anyway, but then the Death of Superman summit, I think, was the second or third one.
Okay.
And it was a different vibe. It was not, it was not in a movie studio in Florida. It was in a conference room at DC with a new outgassing carpet and no windows. And we were there for the serious business of planning the wedding, actually, because the year previous and just before Wheezy and I started on the book, Lois learned Clark's secret, and he proposed to her, and so they were engaged. When our book started, they were already engaged, and so we had gotten together to plan the year of stories leading up to the wedding. And for those of you out there who don't know, I'm sure everybody does, but the super summits were a remarkable way of doing comics, invented by Mike Carlin. It was actually an outgrowth of the Marvel way of doing comics. The Marvel method had always been a writer collaborating with an artist, doing plot first work, which means the writer and the artist talk about the story. The writer types up a synopsis where, with about a paragraph of description per page of art. The artist then draws it all out in pencil. The writer then applies dialogue to the drawn artwork. Rather than writing a whole full script out to begin with, where the artist has to figure out every nuance of the artwork, he just comes back and applies dialogue to artwork that has been already drawn. And so that was the sort of free-form give and take kind of organic collaboration that had created the whole Marvel Age of Comics. That was the method that worked for Stan and Jack and everybody that came after. That's how comics were done at Marvel, the Marvel method. It was a way that sort of maximized the talents or the contribution of everybody involved. DC had traditionally been script first, where the traditional DC way was you'd get a page of script broken down panel by panel, with the paragraph describing what was going on in the panel, then the dialogue of what was being said in the panel, and the caption of what was being narrated in the panel. So you'd get the information 3 times per panel, and it was an inflexible way to work. It's the dominant way of working now, but in those days, I think Mike was very interested in bringing DC its own little Marvel age at DC. So he was trying to import the Marvel method to DC, but he found himself trying to do that with 4 monthly books, all coordinated together. So instead of just it being Stan and Jack over corned beef sandwiches, figuring out what's going to happen in Fantastic Four, it was all 4 writers, all 4 pencilers, all 4 inkers, and the colorist all together in the room with the editors, like a writer's room on television, planning out the arc for the next year. We have a big chart on the wall divided into weeks, 52 little boxes, and we, by the end of the 3-day summit, we'd hopefully have all the boxes filled. And then everyone go their separate ways and write their individual chapters. And when someone screwed up on continuity, Roger would find a way to fix it. and that's how it worked. It was an organic, remarkable level of collaboration that I don't think has been successfully attempted since. It was never done before, hasn't been done since, but it is, I think, the quintessential thing that Mike provided DC at that time, because he really did. I mean, he really did give DC a Marvel age of its own. Superman started with the death of Superman. Superman sold better than he'd had since World War II. So it was selling in the millions again. It became the best-selling comic book in the business for a while. And even after the death of Superman, the sales stayed up, and was eclipsing Batman for a while, which that's why I think Bane came along. Mike went over there with the idea of getting the world to recognize, because Mike loved Superman just like we did, getting the world to recognize to remember why this prototype of all superheroes was important, and why he was still relevant, and why he was still interesting. And by bringing the Marvel method to DC, I think he created a very, very special and unique era in comics in general, and with that franchise in particular. We're still talking about it 30 years later, so there was something to it.
Yeah, it's hanging right here. So
there you go. The short story to the question that everybody always asks is, how did Death Superman come about? And we were there at the Super Summit to talk about how to get Lois and Clark through to the wedding, and when the wedding was going to be, and was the wedding going to be in Superman 75, but then Jeanette came in and pointed out that, hey, there's going to be a new show, Lois and Clark, on television. And Mike and she had a meeting in private, and they thought, wouldn't it be cool if we could integrate the TV show and the movie and the comics, so that when they got married in the comics, they were also getting married on the show? And can we find a way to sort of cross-pollinate both projects there? Which actually was a brilliant idea from a marketing standpoint, but also as a way to draw new readers in, because, you know, if people who love the show can find what they love in the comics, they'll come to the comics. So it's a very good idea. But we were a little petulant about giving up, because we'd already come up with a great year of stories, and we had to scrap all of that. So we were like, well, guess we're starting over. You know, whenever we got stumped for an idea, Jerry Ordway had the same joke every single time. In the back, he'd pipe up and say, "Oh, let's kill him," and we'd all have a laugh and move on. It was the standard clam. We'd all heard Jerry do it a million times, but this time we were really stumped. And this time when Jerry said, "Oh, let's just kill him," Wheezy, who had presided over the X books and had presided over the death of many characters, I'd stopped reading the X books when I think Cyborg got frozen, and poor dear dead Doug and all that sort of stuff. So she killed a lot of characters, and she said, "You know what you get from killing a character is you get to tell the story of the funeral. You get to tell the story of what that character meant to the world, and you get to see it through the eyes of the people who loved him and the people who hated him and the world in general." And that's when we really started thinking about the idea of killing Superman. We didn't start with Doomsday. We didn't start with the death. We started with the funeral, and the funeral kind of wrote itself, because there was this great moment, kind of moment that you dream about in a collaborative situation, where ideas just start flowing from everybody, and great things are getting thrown against the wall, and a lot of them are sticking, and certain key moments, beats come up that are like, yes, that's a pivotal beat. And before you know it, we had the whole Funeral for a Friend written, and it was great, because it felt like we were pouring out our own feelings about Superman through the characters around Superman. And it was, it was sort of like showing the world, if you don't feed the cat, what happens to the cat, and DC had the courage to actually not publish for a few months, which was kind of amazing, because then we didn't have Superman's back in previews before he'd actually died. So that was a gutsy move on DC's part. Smart move, I thought. Mike's idea again. It also gave us all a chance to get caught up on our deadlines. It's a little bonus. But we had the whole Funeral for a Friend down before we began even thinking about how to actually kill Superman.
I wanted to ask, out of that series, Death of Superman, Funeral for a Friend, The Return specifically, is about Steel. He was a character that Superman saved and grew into his own series, and has since become like an integral part in many story arcs in various series over the years. What went into creating Steel?
Well, I have to jump ahead a couple of years, because we had the death, we'd had the return, and the funeral. I'm sorry, we had the death, we had the funeral, and then we needed to keep people guessing for a little bit, because they stopped publishing Superman for a while. Then when the book came back, it was still Superman without Superman.
Mhm.
And Mike had the idea of the League of Substitute Supermen, which was an idea from the Silver Age, from his childhood. And he was wondering, well, what would that look like updated? What if we had 4 replacement Supermen? And that would give each of the team who had been working in such close continuity for so long a little chance to spread their wings and do their own thing. So we started talking about the idea, and Dan, who one of Dan's geniuses is that he keeps an eye on the big picture, and he's always looking to create good villains for Superman. Villains Superman could punch.
Mhm.
Because Superman's rogues gallery in the olden days was pretty lame. There were a lot of business suit villains. There were a lot of villains that with one punch from Superman would be like a red mist. So we all wanted to be able to draw fight scenes. But Dan was consistent in his attempts to create bad guys that Superman could hit. He came into the Super Summit where we decided to kill Superman. He came in with a sketch of Doomsday, and he wasn't called Doomsday at the time. He was just a monster du jour, a monster of the month at the time, a new character for Superman to hit. It just turned out that he was also the perfect vehicle for the death of, by popular acclaim, actually, from all of us. He had the idea of doing a substitute Superman that ends up being a bad guy. And he suggested, I think he thought that Weezy and I would do good doing a sort of a comedy relief character. So he said, why don't you do like a working class schlub? And Weezy and I didn't want to do we liked the idea of working class. We didn't really like the idea of schlub, because for our take on Superman was, I think, we were interested in Superman's heart. I don't mean romance. I mean his character, the guts of the character. So we wanted to take those qualities that made Superman in our minds and see how they applied to another character. But Dan's suggestion of a working class blue collar Superman made us think about the legend of John Henry, which was a story I'd loved as a kid. Just the idea of, this iconic big black dude fighting the man, fighting the machine, the Enkidu, for the rights and dignity of working people everywhere. It struck a very sort of blue state chord in my childhood soul, even back as a 6-year-old. But then Weezy pointed out something I'd never known, which that it wasn't just a story. There really was a John Henry. He was a real historical character. He really did die in a battle beating a steam-driven drilling machine during the laying of the railroad, and that he was real. So that really fired us up to do a character based on John Henry. There wasn't a lot of diversity in comics in those days. We didn't think, oh, let's do a black character. We said, oh, let's do John Henry. But John Henry's black, so he had to be black. In order for me to get to draw that iconic shot of the big black guy at the forge, he had to be a big black guy. We started talking about that, and John Henry just, I watched Weezy's amazing mind just suddenly whoosh, get right to the heart and core of the character, and from that just spin up the whole thing. It's really fun when you see really smart people do what they do so well, and you watch it happen. It's just awesome. So at the meeting, we had the whole thing with John Henry in the basic outline of his story. The idea that I wanted him to be inspired by Superman, and Weezy took that and made it more than that Superman actually redeems him, gives him a way to redeem himself. And so that whole story got written in a matter of minutes, actually. The whole arc did.
And how about the design, the actual design of the character? I know you said you took inspiration from John Henry, but I'd imagine coming up with a new character that there's always a lot of iteration. Did you have to go through a lot of designs before you landed on what actually came out in Reign of the Superman?
Well, I was in a way, I was a little bit mercenary about it. I thought that, Marvel, DC didn't really have an Iron Man equivalent. Iron Man is cool. He's a staple character at Marvel. DC did not really have an Iron Man equivalent. And I thought but they already did have a gadget rich billionaire hero. So I kind of wanted to do a working class Iron Man with John Henry Irons. So I wanted to design cool armor that, was muscle fitting, form fitting like Iron Man, but didn't look too much like Iron Man. Right. And he had to have a cape because he was inspired by Superman. But also, a cape and a hammer is a little bit Thor-like. So I was trying to pull a bit of Marvel into DC and give DC counterpoints to some of the Marvel franchises.
Yeah, makes sense. We want to be mindful of your time. I have a couple more questions, but you were on Man of Steel throughout, obviously, this period of time, but for 8 years in total, which is a monumental run on any one comic. I'm curious what you thought as you were going through it, and if you can sort of, basically draw, this cast in your sleep by the end of it, or what helped keep it fresh for you.
Well, a couple of things help keep it fresh. One, fanatical love of the characters. Two, the struggle to get better. I may love something while I'm drawing it, but the minute I'm done, I start seeing everything that's wrong with it. And usually it's too late. You can't rework it now. You can't reconceive it now. It's due. But I guess like all artists, I'm pretty hypercritical of my own work. But also I was trying to get better. I was trying to grow. I was trying to learn. I was also trying to I was really struggling to find a style that would really work with Dennis, to make sure that to see if I could craft a style of working that would play to his strengths as much as possible and avoid some of the disappointments. So I was driven to improve my collaboration with him. I was driven just to improve. One of the things about working on the Superman books is that every week Mike would send Xeroxes, big packages of Xeroxes of everything everyone has drawn to everyone. So you got to see what your colleagues and peers were doing every single week. And that was a tremendous stimulant to push yourself, because, you're drawn away and your stamina might be flagging after your sixth 18-hour day. And then these amazing pages from Dan come in, or these amazing pages from Jerry or Butch or Tom come in. And it's like, well, you're reborn. And it sort of drives you to goose yourself up. But also when you're working with a writer you love, who's always feeding you stuff that is just going to be so fun to draw. And when you're working with characters who feel as real to you as real people, and Metropolis, I don't know if you remember this, but years before that, Kurt Swan had done a story where he'd illustrated a dream he'd had when he actually flew with Superman, and he dreamt he was with Superman and saw Metropolis. He did a little story like that. That sort of is the experience that I experienced, in that the different neighborhoods of Metropolis became so real to me that I knew exactly what they looked like and where they were in relation to each other, and individual buildings and streets and like that. And the people were the same. The characters were just, they were like family, and drawing them was like portraits. So it never got old. If you look at my work, you can see the style sort of changing as it goes on. You can see me take some wrong turns. You can see me make some leaps forward. You can see me hopefully generally improve. But every issue looks different from the last issue. And I think that's part of what kept it fresh for me. So just keep, I never got comfortable.
I wanted to jump ahead a bit to all right, I'm going to preface this with, you appear to be a huge Superman fan, and I respect that, and this is why I'm going to ask you.
True.
Because as am I, as you could tell. You worked on Superman Red and Blue.
Mm-hmm.
And one, how was that experience for you? And two, what was your opinion of the character at that time?
Well,
as it pertains to the whole like Superman Blue, then splitting and red. And
yeah, honestly, the whole electric powers syndrome was initially very frustrating to me, because, I came on the book to draw Superman, and a few issues in, bam, he's dead. And then, for most of a year, he's not there. And then when he comes back, he's in a black suit, and then he's got long hair. And it's like, I'd gone 5 or 6 years working on the book without ever really getting to draw a classic run of classic Superman. So I was beginning to get frustrated like that. And then the whole idea for the electric Superman and the costume change, and I was like, oh my God. But I found my way into it because I looked at it as Captain Kirk in a transporter accident, right? And Superman Red and Superman Blue would be two sides of Superman's personality.
Mm-hmm.
The Superman Red was kind of the wisecracking, flippant guy you'd see in the 1940s. He was sort of a John Sakella, Ira Yarborough version of Superman. And then Superman Blue was a more serious, Dan Jurgens inspired Superman. And so if you look at my issues involving the red and blue costumes, you're going to see that I'm drawing basically two different people, two different characters, and I found that kind of fun. And I did get to make fun of the blue costume and the electric powers because Wheezy let me write that 22-page fart joke with Mixus Pitalik. Frappapoom and Ronk.
Yeah, I'm always curious because as a fan, I've stuck with Superman through all the various changes and ups and downs, if you will, and that's what you do. And I was hyped initially to, I bought the Superman Blue comic, a couple issues. It's glowed in the dark, and it was really cool. And the 3D, which is over there somewhere, the 3D glasses of the red and blue. So that was cool, all gimmicky. And I was hoping to get more out of that run, and I just really it frustrated me as a comic book collector. And I was just curious to not trying to knock anyone's work or anything, but just as a fan, what I was just always curious what you thought about that.
I think I would have liked it better if we'd all sort of played up the different personalities.
Yeah,
I think
they never leaned into that much.
I think it would have been cool to do an arc where the longer they're apart, the more different they become.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it's time to reintegrate, how do you reconcile two guys who have become completely different people? But that's
Interesting.
I don't know if we thought our way through that or whatever, but that take on the character never really caught on. I think that was just in my head.
Do you think there weren't enough colors? Do you think we could have gone to yellow and green and purple?
Well, you see, they had the Green Lantern people doing that, so
They were saving that for someone who had color in their name.
Maybe if it had been a really successful thing, that would have been the next year. Superman Red, Superman Blue was a suggestion of Glennie Whitmore, who was the colorist, oddly enough. And it did kind of seem like a fun stunt. And Glenn hadn't had a lot of opportunities for input. So when he came up with this, it seemed like it was Glenn's turn. And it also seemed like it might be fun. But and parts of it were fun, but it didn't end up really having a point.
Mhm.
And I think that might be what you're sensing in there, is that we didn't, it was a sort of and then thing that happened. This happened, then this happened, then this happened, but it didn't really gel into a point or an event or a thing or a conflict that had to be reconciled, like Superman Red and Superman Blue. Can they ever be two again, or would you have to send one of them off to another dimension or something like that? I mean, I'm still kind of interested in that story.
Yeah, it seemed
I have a very close friend named Bobby Timoney, who's just drawn a Super Pets, a phenomenal Super Pets graphic novel for DC, and he is identical twins with his brother Pete. But
I know those guys.
You know those guys?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. Pete and Bobby Timoney.
Yeah.
Bobby's
Evil
awesome.
Twins comics
Evil
at
Twins.
some point.
Yep.
Yeah.
And they were like a Hal Roach comedy when they were kids. They were like always like playing tricks on their mom and saying, making her think that she didn't know who was who, and raising hell in school and getting out of trouble because blaming it on the other one, and the other one wasn't there. And their life was a Hal Roach comedy. But of course, they're different human beings and they live in different parts of the country, and so they've become different men. And I just think doing that with Superman would have been really interesting. And would we have forced them back together somehow? Would the sum be greater than the sum be greater than the individual parts? Or would we have a new Superman now to send off into another reality or something like that, or another character we could use somewhere else? I don't know. It could have added an asset to DC Comics. I don't know, but it didn't end up that way. What are you going to do? Yeah,
it just seemed like they created that just so that the Superman Forever issue would be something, okay. It was, at that, what was it? His fifth, I don't know, whatever his birthday was at that 60 years. And they were like, oh, well, let's make it special. So, well, that's when he comes back together, and we're going to get Alex Ross to do a whole thing, and he's going to fly.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, maybe, Mike was not on the book anymore.
Okay.
And we were still trying to do the Mike Marvel method, the mega Marvel method that Mike invented. But without Mike at the helm, Mike is a genius for, okay, but what's the point? Okay, but where's this going?
Right.
And I think we needed someone at the reins who thought that way, and we just didn't. We dropped the ball.
Well, everything old is new again, so you never know what opportunity you might have to put your plan into place, which I think sounds really cool. Is there a sort of Firestorm-esque, having the two personalities sort of melding, but I like the idea. So,
well, I mean, that's why we might end up making it impossible for him to meld, to do the story where they separate, and as they separate, they become differently, and then they have the opportunity to come back together. And they try and it's a miserable failure. And so they have to split again. And you have one Superman go off into be a space adventure, take on a new identity or something. And then the other Superman is, well, it's a way to solve creeping powers syndrome. He's back down to starting powers. So it's a way to reboot without rebooting. It could have been so good.
It could still happen. Look, they got the multiverse of, infinite possibilities happening. So
That's
anything and everything can happen. Everything counts.
That's the glory of DC. Yeah.
What? Oh, we have a great idea. We didn't use it. Another Earth.
Another Earth.
There we
just
go.
Create another universe.
Another Earth.
We can do this story.
As long as we don't take it into political territory with Red America and Blue America, I think we'll be okay. Where it's divisive already. We can't do it with Superman.
I don't know. God, that would be horrible. Thanksgiving would never be. Thanksgiving could destroy the world.
Are you one of those blue Superman types?
Yeah. Oh, that's great.
The show took a turn.
I love it.
Well, John, look, I want to thank you for talking to us. I think, the three of us could talk to you for another hour or so, because I know I still have like 4 or 5 other questions I wanted to ask you, but I want to be mindful of your time and everyone else as well. Where can fans follow you on social or your website?
I'm sort of iffy on social media just because I get into doom scrolling and it wastes a lot of time and ends up depressing me. But I am on Twitter, and I occasionally will drop a pithy remark there. And I still have a Facebook account. And if I want to gas on about something provocative, I will sometimes drop something there. And I'm on Quora of all things, if you can believe this, which is that's a really weird site. But I have a ton of bloviations on Quora with me gassing on about comics and about things completely unrelated to comics. So you can follow me there. I will be teaching a course, an 8-week course for Stage 32, starting January 8th. So there's still time to register if somebody is looking for a master's class in visual storytelling, not at masterclass prices. You can get Stage 32 is an organization. My understanding of it is that they try to give you a college level education, but in a piecemeal fashion. So you just take the courses you really want, and it's practical instruction in whatever it is. And it's primarily film. It's primarily a film school, but they're branching out to other realms. So I will be teaching comics, storyboarding, all forms of visual storytelling, tools and techniques, of course, but also, how to make your stories really live. And I'll be passing on the knowledge that I've learned from Walter Simonson and Louise Simonson and Neil Adams and Mike Kaluta and Charles Vess and Bernie Wrightson and all the masters who have shared their wisdom with me over the years. And I'll try to present it in a way. I've done a fair bit of teaching. I've never taught on Zoom before, so it's going to be a bit of an experiment for me. But if you're all interested in that, if anybody out there is interested in a master's class in visual storytelling, go to stage32.com and register. And I'll see you in January for 8 weeks into February. So there's that. And then in between all of that sort of stuff, I'm working on a science fiction epic for Storm King Productions, Storm King Publications. John Carpenter's wife, Sandy King Carpenter's company. A science fiction epic written by Kal-El. So
that's awesome.
So everyone, that is our interview with Jon Bogdanove. Really cool. All right. A Superman fan who ended up working on Superman and named his son Kal-El. I tried that. My wife wasn't having any of it. Nonetheless, great guy to talk to.
Yeah, this was a real treat. So many wonderful stories. Again, I mean, we're got broken records here. People we could talk to for hours on end. Love to have him back to ask him more about other parts of his career. But such an interesting and important part of Superman history.
Yeah, I thought it was a great last episode for Season of Superman for the year. Would love to have him on again. We say that about every guest. But yeah, that that'll do it really for this season, this year of Dollar Bin Bandits, our inaugural year. So we wanted to say thank you to all of you from the bottom of our hearts. We've put a lot into this show, getting a lot of guests that you want to hear, and doing these interviews. So thank you for listening. We have only bigger and better things to come in 2022. And we will sign off for now. You know where to find us. You know what to do. And, Joe has a few last words. So, Joe, go ahead.
I do. Thank you, Michael. I want to thank these two other gentlemen that I am broadcasting with. This whole Dollar Bin Bandits thing is Oren's brainchild. He came to me February last year, said, hey, let's do some type of podcast, because we've been wanting to do a podcast for like a year or so prior. And he's like, do you want to talk about comics? I was like, yeah, sure, I'll talk about comics. So that's how all this started. And we couldn't do this without our buddy Mike. The three of us have been buds for years, so it was only fitting that Mike joined us. So I want to thank the two of them for working with me, because I'm just a peach to deal with, I'm sure. But it's been an absolute pleasure working with these two guys over the years. And it's been absolutely awesome to talk about comics with them for the past year or so. So thank you both.
Well, thank you, Joe, for all the hard work you do getting these out there. And it's been a blast. And thank you to these guests that we've had who've taken the time out of their days and nights to speak with us, let us pick their brain. And it's really been amazing how generous they are with their time. And so thank you guys so much, everyone so much. And this is can't wait for season 2.
You guys are making me misty-eyed. So all I'll say is thank you again to you two, of course. I do think we make a pretty good team. And Happy New Year, everybody. We'll see you in 2022 with more Dollar Bin Bandits.